I'm asleep in my own bed, but through the haze of my dreams I hear familiar footsteps. He's coming closer. He picks up a pillow and presses it down over my face. He's suffocating me with all his strength, and I can't manage to push him away. My heart is pounding wildly. I keep trying to shove him off, again and again, but it's useless. Terrified, I wake up drenched in sweat, and realize it was only a dream. I had dreamed of my own son-in-law. And in that dream, he was trying to strangle me. I feel it every time we see each other, at family dinners or casual gatherings. A son-in-law like that is what most women could only dream of, they'd say. He tells my daughter he loves her more than anything in the world. But I don't like him. Deep down, I feel he's not the man he pretends to be. The dreams kept coming. I dreamed he tried to slip poison into my coffee, that he peeked under the hood of my car to sabotage it and cause an accident, hoping I wouldn't survive. When he comes to my house, he acts like he owns the place. I hide my medications from him and won't let him into the kitchen. I'm afraid he'll put arsenic in the food I keep in the fridge. My gut tells me he is evil and capable of only bad things. When I phoned to ask what day the wedding would be, my daughter simply said, "Oh, Mom, we already tied the knot. We only invited the people who truly mattered. Just mail us the beach house keys and quit being so dramatic." I didn't argue, didn't let my voice crack. I just smiled to myself, hung up the phone, and let silence carry the weight. 3 days later, I placed a wedding present on their doorstep, the kind of gift that had her new husband screaming like a man who'd just stepped into hellfire. If you're watching this right now, make sure to hit subscribe and tell me in the comments where you're tuning in from, because you'll want to know exactly how we ended up here. See, this story doesn't begin with that phone call. It started 2 years back, the day my daughter Vivian walked through my door with a man named George. My name's Whitney, I'm 65, and until just a few days ago, I believed I understood my daughter better than anyone. We used to talk every single day. She'd ring me on her lunch breaks just to chat, sometimes about the latest Netflix shows, sometimes about some silly gossip from work, or to vent about her string of dating disasters. Then she brought home George, and for once I thought maybe her luck had changed. Vivian had worked hard all her life, she deserved someone who saw both her sharp mind and her tender heart. "Mom, he's different," she told me that first night, glowing like a woman who finally felt seen. "He really understands me." That evening, I'd baked my famous lasagna, the one she'd begged me for since she was 12 years old. George walked in wearing an expensive suit, holding a bouquet of roses, and tossing compliments about how cozy and beautiful my home was. He was the kind of handsome that looks polished, the kind that usually makes me suspicious. But seeing Vivian so over the moon, I shoved those doubts down. Over dinner, George asked me about my nursing career, listened as though every story mattered, and kept nodding like a man who respected experience. He praised my cooking, carried plates to the sink, and even rolled up his sleeves to offer help with the dishes. All those gestures screamed perfect gentleman, but to me, they felt a little too practiced. When he hugged me goodbye, George said, "Your mother raised an incredible woman. You must be so proud." And I was. Vivian had built a strong life for herself, a marketing career that was thriving, a condo she owned outright, and the kind of independence that didn't lean on anyone. She was stubborn, confident, and fiercely capable. Everything I'd tried to teach her. Still, that night something unsettled me. Maybe it was the way he talked about her, as though she were a trophy he'd managed to win. Or maybe it was how he kept circling back to my beach house. He mentioned that property 3 separate times before dessert. I own a little beach house that's been in my family for 15 years. Vivian and I spent nearly every summer there, just the two of us, building sandcastles and traditions. The next day, I told my sister Janet, "He seems awfully interested in our traditions." "That's sweet, Whitney," she said. "It means he wants to belong." I wanted so badly to believe that. But George's perfect smile stirred up old memories of Todd, my ex-husband, Vivian's father. Todd had that same slick charm, that same ability to make you feel special right up until the moment you realized you were just another stepping stone in his life. Over the next several months, I saw George weave himself into every corner of Vivian's world. Suddenly he had thoughts about which of her friends were good influences, what jobs she should take seriously, even how often she ought to talk to me. Our daily calls slipped to weekly, then monthly, until they were barely happening at all. George thinks I should be more focused on us, Vivian explained when I asked why she sounded distant. He says strong couples always put each other first. That should have been a blazing red flag, but I told myself I was just being the overprotective mom. Vivian was 28, grown, and perfectly capable of making her own choices. If she was happy, then I told myself I should be happy too. Then the engagement news hit, not from her lips, but from Facebook. I found out about my only daughter's engagement the same way strangers did, through a photograph. Her left hand held up, flashing a diamond so big it nearly blinded the screen. The caption read, "He asked." I said yes. Can't wait to start our forever together. 53 likes rolled in, comments from friends and coworkers congratulating her. Not a single one asking where her mother was, because why would they? They probably assumed I already knew. I sat at my kitchen table staring at that photo for 10 straight minutes, my coffee turning cold in front of me, my chest tightening with disbelief. My daughter was engaged, and the world knew before I did. I picked up the phone and called her right away. "Oh my God, Mom, I'm so sorry." Vivian's voice was full of laughter and nerves. "It happened last night, we were just swept up in the moment. George proposed at our favorite restaurant, and then we went back to his place and called his parents. By the time we finished, it was so late. I was going to call you this morning, I promise." "Congratulations, sweetheart," I said, forcing warmth into every syllable. "Tell me everything." And she did. For 20 minutes, she spilled every detail, the proposal, the sparkle of the ring, how George's parents had already started planning an engagement party at their country club. She talked about a spring wedding and how magical it all felt. "When's the engagement party?" I asked. There was a pause. "Next Saturday. It's going to be small, just close family and a few friends." "Should I plan on driving down Friday night?" I asked. Another pause, longer this time. "Mom, about that. George's family has very specific traditions. His mother is traditional, and she's organized everything according to how they do things." A chill settled deep in my stomach. "And what exactly does that mean, Vivian?" "It means, well, it's mostly for George's side of the family and some of our couple friends. It's not that you're not important, Mom. It's just the way his family does it, and George thinks we should respect that." George thinks. Everything now revolved around what George thought. "I see," I said, careful to keep my voice steady. "And what do you think?" "I think George knows his family better than I do, and I just want to start things off right with them. You understand, don't you? We'll do something special soon, just the three of us." But that special something never happened. 6 months passed, and I only saw George twice, each time he was courteous but distant, like I was some elderly aunt instead of the mother who'd raised Vivian alone after her father walked out when she was 8. All the wedding plans unfolded without me. Vivian would casually mention things in conversation, they'd booked a venue, hired a photographer, chosen the flowers. Whenever I offered to help or asked questions, she'd brush it off with a vague, "George is handling most of it," or "his mother has connections." About 3 months ago, I asked Vivian if she knew the wedding date so I could request time off from my little part-time job at the local library. "We're thinking early October," she said. "Probably the second weekend. George is still checking out venues." "That sounds wonderful," I told her. "October is always breathtaking. Are you considering the beach house? We could host it there." She laughed softly. "Oh no, Mom. George wants something more elegant, more sophisticated than a backyard beach wedding." Her words landed harder than I expected. For as long as I could remember, Vivian had adored that beach house. When she was a little girl, she'd twirl around barefoot in the sand, declaring that one day she wanted to get married there, with fairy lights glowing between the dunes. I forced a smile she couldn't see. Of course, sweetheart. Whatever makes you happy. But from that point on, I noticed I wasn't included in anything. No invitations to see venues. No say in the guest list. No trips to pick out dresses. Instead, I saw photos on Instagram of Vivian dress shopping with George's mother, her future mother-in-law beaming proudly beside her in every picture. It felt like I was slowly becoming nothing more than a spectator in my own daughter's life. Then came the final blow, 2 weeks ago. I was reorganizing my linen closet one ordinary Tuesday evening when the phone rang. Vivian's name flashed on the screen, and I answered without thinking. That call burned itself into my memory. "Mom, I need to ask you something," she said. "And I really need you to be cool about it." Nothing good ever followed a sentence like that. I sat down on my bed, bracing myself. "All right, sweetheart. What is it?" "George has been reading about family dynamics and setting healthy boundaries in marriage," she explained. "He thinks it's really important we establish independence from the start." A familiar chill ran through me. What kind of independence are we talking about here? "Well," she hesitated, "he pointed out that I've leaned on you emotionally my whole life. Like when I'm stressed or upset, I usually call you instead of working things through with him. He thinks that could cause problems in our marriage." "Vivian," I said carefully, "leaning on your mother when you're upset isn't unhealthy. That's called being human." "But is it?" she pressed. "George showed me articles about women who put their mothers before their husbands, and how that ruins marriages. I don't want to be that wife, Mom." I closed my eyes. I knew exactly what this was. George was cutting her off from her support system, and he'd dressed it up to look like self-help. "And practically speaking," I asked slowly, "what does that mean?" "It means we should set some boundaries. Less frequent calls, more space for me and George to build our own traditions." She paused. "And George thinks it would be healthier if we spent the holidays with his family this year. Just to break the pattern of dependence." The holidays. Every Christmas since Todd left us, Vivian and I had been together. It was our thing. She'd drive up from Boston on Christmas Eve, and we'd stay in pajamas until noon, sipping hot chocolate and tearing into presents like she was still 12. I swallowed hard. "I see," I said, my voice sounding strangely far away. "Anything else?" She hesitated again. "Actually, yes. George thinks the beach house situation is complicated." My chest tightened. "What about the beach house?" "Well, I always kind of assumed I'd inherit it someday. But George pointed out that puts pressure on us. He says it makes him feel like he can never really relax there, because it's not truly ours. It's yours. And if something ever happened between you and me, we'd lose our vacation spot." I gripped the phone tighter. "Are you asking me to sign the house over to you?" "Not exactly," she said quickly. "George just thinks it would be better if we found our own place. Somewhere that belongs to us. He doesn't want to feel like you're always watching over us when we're supposed to be relaxing." Watching them? I'd hardly seen George twice in the last year. "Vivian," I said firmly, "that house has been in our family for 15 years. It's where you learned to swim. It's where we built countless memories together." "I know, Mom," she said softly. "I treasure those memories. But I'm starting a new family now. George needs to feel like we have our own special places. Our own special places. Places that didn't include me." I ended that call with promises to think it over and respect their need for space. But inside, my mind was already turning. I wasn't plotting revenge yet. Not quite. But I knew I needed to uncover who George really was, and what his true intentions for my daughter might be. It only took me a week of careful online digging and a few discreet calls to Vivian's old college friends to uncover his trail. George had a pattern. Vivian wasn't his first serious girlfriend. There had been Tiffany, whose parents owned a thriving restaurant chain. She, too, had been pulled away from her family before her father called off the wedding after discovering George's mountain of gambling debts. Before Tiffany, there was Zoe. George had tried to get access to her trust fund, but her brothers shut him down in time. That's when the truth hit me like a freight train. George Stewart wasn't just controlling, he was a predator. He hunted intelligent, successful women who happened to have family money. And Vivian, with her promising career and her expected inheritance of my beachfront property, was simply his next target. That's when I began planning the wedding gift. The phone call that sealed it all came just 3 days ago, on a Wednesday morning while I was outside deadheading my roses. When Vivian's name lit up my phone, I felt that old rush of joy before reality reminded me of how things stood. "Hi, Mom." Her voice sounded flat. Mechanical. "Hello, sweetheart. How are you? I'm calling to let you know George and I got married yesterday. It was a small ceremony. Just immediate family and close friends." I froze. Yesterday? But I thought the wedding was in October. "We decided to do something more intimate," she said quickly. George felt a big wedding was too much pressure, too commercial. "We found this lovely venue in Martha's Vineyard and kept it simple. Simple. And secret." "Congratulations," I managed, forcing the words through my throat. "I'm sure it was beautiful." "It was perfect," she said without hesitation. George's parents were there, his sister even flew in from California. Jessica was my maid of honor, and George's best friend Tom stood as best man. The photographer got amazing shots. A few weeks earlier, she started rattling off details like she was reading from a brochure, not telling me about the happiest day of her life, but listing facts. I said, "That sounds lovely, Vivian. I'm so happy for you." "Thanks, Mom." "Oh, and George and I were wondering if you could send us the keys to the beach house," she said casually. "We're thinking of spending our honeymoon there since we didn't have time to plan a proper trip." There it was, the real reason for the call. It wasn't to share her joy or to include me in some huge milestone. It was a request for the keys to a property they had already decided would be theirs. "The keys to the beach house?" I repeated, slow and deliberate. "Right. George is dying to see it. I've told him so much about the place over the years. He's curious about the renovations you've done and how much the property's appreciated." Property value appreciation. How romantic, I thought. "Vivian," I asked, "when you say you got married yesterday, do you mean you had a ceremony or are you legally married?" "Both," she said. "We got the license last week and had a little ceremony yesterday." "And you didn't invite your mother?" I asked, because sometimes shock needed a question to settle. There was a pause on the line. "Mom, please don't make this dramatic," she urged. It was George's call to keep it small, especially after all that boundary stuff we talked about. "I thought you'd understand." I understood everything, painfully well. I understood that my daughter had married a man who convinced her excluding her own mother was healthy. I understood that George had succeeded in isolating Vivian from the one person who might have protected her. "So, you'll send the keys?" she asked. "We're hoping to drive up this Friday." "Of course, sweetheart. I'll make sure you get them," I said. After we hung up, I sat in the garden for a long time, staring at the roses, tracing patterns in my mind. George loved patterns: isolate women, win access to assets, and move on when the questions started piling up. He'd count on people like me to shrink away quietly. He'd made the mistake of thinking I'd be helpless. Underestimate a woman who's been cornered and you'll find out what happens when she fights. I spent the rest of that day on the phone and at my computer. By evening I had the records and documents I needed. Not to humiliate, not for petty revenge, for justice. My gift would be worth more than any trinket on a registry, it would be the gift of truth. I've always believed the best presents keep giving. So Friday morning, I drove to Vivian and George's apartment with a package meant to leave an impression. The box was wrapped in silver paper with a neat white bow. Inside I had placed a leather portfolio filled with documents I'd spent 72 hours assembling. George would get to meet his new family connections. I left it on their doorstep with a short note: "Congratulations on your marriage. Every new husband should know about his wife's family history. With love, Whitney." Then I went home and waited. At 2:17 p.m. the phone rang. Vivian's number, but George's voice, screaming. "What the hell is wrong with you? You crazy old witch. How dare you send us this garbage?" I set my teacup down carefully. "Hello, George. I take it you opened your wedding gift. This is harassment." "I'm calling the police," he spat. I was amused enough to ask, "What exactly would you report?" In the background I heard Vivian sobbing. George barked, "This woman is insane. She's trying to ruin our marriage before it even starts." I couldn't stop myself from smiling. "Surely you're not upset that I shared some interesting family history," I said, calm as a Sunday morning. "I thought you'd like to know about the ties between our families." The truth was stranger than fiction. In my digging I'd found that George's grandfather, Jan Stewart, had been tangled up in a serious business deal with my late husband, Todd, back in 1987, a real estate development that went horribly wrong. The documents in that portfolio told the whole story: how Jan and Todd partnered on a shopping center project, how Stewart siphoned money from their joint accounts, and how Todd lost nearly everything, even his first marriage, because of it. Stewart had fled to Florida with more than $2 million, leaving Todd bankrupt and facing lawsuits. But the clincher was a 1993 newspaper clipping I included. On his deathbed, Jan Stewart confessed to his grandson George about the money he'd stolen and the offshore accounts where he'd hidden it. Accounts George had apparently been tapping into for years, the money that paid for his tailored suits, his expensive lifestyle, and the ways he charmed women like my daughter without holding down a proper job. Money that, legally, belonged to Todd's estate, and since Todd died 3 years ago, the rightful heir was Vivian. "George," I said into the receiver, steady and precise, "I also included contact details for the law firm that handled Todd's estate. They'll want to talk to you about the offshore accounts your grandfather mentioned." The screaming stopped so fast I could hear the panic sliding into his voice. "You're lying," he managed, but the bluster was gone. "I never lie," I replied. "I'm a retired nurse. We're trained to be exact with facts. But don't take my word for it," I told him over the line. "I'm sure your grandfather's lawyer in Miami will remember you. Mr. Rodriguez has been very helpful in tracing the paper trail." I could hear Vivian in the background, asking what I meant, what money I was talking about. Then, almost casually, I added, "Oh, and George, the beach house keys are in the portfolio as well. Consider that my wedding gift to you both." I imagined him trying to enjoy ocean views while reading through family financial records. Then I hung up and poured myself another cup of tea, feeling oddly serene. The following hours promised to be interesting. By 6:30 that evening Vivian called. Her voice was hoarse from crying and George's shouting echoed behind her. "Mom, what did you do?" she asked. I was sitting on the porch watching the sunset, more at peace than I'd been in months. "I gave you both a wedding gift, sweetheart. Did you read everything?" "I read enough," she said. "George says it's all lies, that you're trying to break us up." "What do you think, Vivian?" I asked. There was a long, shaky pause. I think I need you to explain some things." "He knew about the money," she whispered. "George's grandfather really stole from Dad, $2, $3 million, the bank records say." I told her how Todd had spent years trying to recover what was taken, how Jen Stewart disappeared, and how the stress helped drive Todd away when she was 8. Another hush. Then, muffled and furious, I could hear George approaching the phone. "The deathbed confession suggests George did know," I said. "And the private investigator I hired found records of George accessing several of those accounts over the last 5 years. He's been living off money that legally belonged to your father's estate." "That's impossible," she breathed. "George runs a consulting business, he says he works with high-net-worth clients. My heart went out to her in that moment. Vivian, when's the last time you saw him actually work? A client meeting, a contract, a business call? Silence. In the background, George demanded she hang up. I pushed on. The law firm wants to speak with you. As Todd's heir, you have a claim to that money plus interest. They estimate it's nearly $4 million now. $4 million? Her voice was a bare thread. George married you 3 days after you hired the private investigator. That timing, doesn't that seem suspicious? Then I heard George, loud and practiced, insisting I was jealous and trying to destroy their marriage. Ask yourself this, Vivian, I said gently. If none of this is true, why is George so upset? If his grandfather were innocent, wouldn't he want to clear the family name? Wouldn't he want justice for what happened to your father? There was a pause, only the sound of her breathing. There's more, I added. My investigator found records of 2 previous engagements, Tiffany Morris in 2019 and Zoe Walsh in 2021. Both called off when their families uncovered George's financial lies. Both women had family money. Both were isolated before the truth came out. Stop, Vivian whispered. I have their contact information if you want to speak with them. Stop, she said, and the line went dead. I put the phone down and watched the sky grow darker. Tomorrow she would have to decide whom to trust, the man who had cut her off from people who loved her, or the facts that could free her. That night, for the first time in 2 years, George Stewart would sleep knowing the house of cards he'd built was starting to collapse. And I slept better than I had in months, comforted that my daughter finally had the truth. The gift that keeps giving, indeed. Vivian didn't call back that night or the next day. On Sunday morning I found her on my front porch steps, still wearing the same clothes from Friday, eyes red and puffy, hair unwashed, looking like she hadn't slept in days. Tell me everything, she said without a hello. We made coffee and sat at the kitchen table where she'd done homework as a child and where we'd planned her future together. Now we were going to lay out how the man she'd married might be a fraud. George left yesterday, she told me, staring into her cup. Packed 2 suitcases and said he needed time to think. He told me you were poisoning our marriage, that if I believed you over him, maybe we weren't meant to be. Classic manipulation, give the victim an ultimatum so they feel responsible for the relationship's failure. Where did he go? I asked. I don't know. He turned off his phone. She looked up, tears brimming. Mom, I found something. She reached into her purse and pulled out a manila folder. After George left, she'd gone through his laptop, his desk, everything. She spread printed emails across my table, correspondence between George and someone named Marcus Webb discussing the Stewart inheritance and access to offshore accounts. The dates stretched back 2 years, long before George ever met Vivian. There's more, she said, strength returning to her voice. I called Tiffany Morris yesterday, the woman mentioned in your investigator's report. I raised an eyebrow. What did she say? Everything, Vivian said. How George isolated her, how he convinced her to add him to bank accounts, how it all fell apart when her family discovered what he'd done. Tiffany had even told Vivian that George convinced her to write a will leaving everything to him. Her father, suspicious, hired a private investigator and uncovered George's pattern. When they confronted him, George vanished overnight. Vivian showed me her phone, scrolling through a thread of messages. Tiffany put me in touch with Zoe Walsh, too, she said. Same exact story, Mom. The same routine. He hunts down successful women with family money, charms them, cuts them off from everyone they love, and then maneuvers his way into their assets. I reached across the table and squeezed her hand. I'm so sorry, sweetheart. Don't apologize, she said firmly. You tried to warn me, and I chose not to see it. I trusted a man I'd known for 2 years over the mother who raised me. She wiped at her eyes with the back of her hand. Then she added, Tiffany told me something else. George didn't just meet her by chance in that coffee shop. He researched her family beforehand, he knew about the beach house, Dad's financial troubles, the fact you were widowed. Even the coffee shop accident wasn't an accident. Vivian had always thought fate stepped in that day when she spilled coffee on George's expensive shirt and started their first conversation. But fate had nothing to do with it. "What are you going to do?" I asked quietly. She looked up at me with the same fierce expression she'd worn at 12, the day she marched into school determined to stand up to a bully. "I'm going to destroy him," she said flatly. "But I'll need your help." For the first time in 2 years, my daughter wasn't pushing me away, she was asking me to stand with her. And for the first time in what felt like forever, I smiled with genuine joy. "Tell me what you need." Our plan was simple and sharp. Men like George always come back once they think the storm has blown over. He'd apologize, pretend to be remorseful, maybe claim he'd been confused or overwhelmed. He'd smooth-talk his way back into Vivian's trust, hoping to pick up right where he left off. Only this time, we'd be waiting. That Monday, Vivian called the law firm and met with Todd's estate attorney, Patricia Winters. The news was better than I dared hope. Not only did Vivian have a legal claim to the money Jan Stewart had stolen, but because George had knowingly accessed those accounts, he could be charged with criminal conspiracy and money laundering. "The original theft is outside the statute of limitations," Patricia explained, but George's recent withdrawals reset the legal clock. "He's been living off stolen property for years." Patricia then connected Vivian with a federal investigator, Agent Jennifer Max, who specialized in financial fraud. To our shock, Agent Max had already been tracking George, building a case from complaints filed by Tiffany's and Zoe's families. "We've been waiting for the right opportunity," Agent Max told us during a conference call. "Your situation gives us the missing pieces. If you're willing, we can run a controlled operation." Vivian didn't hesitate. She wanted George held accountable, not just for her, but for Tiffany, for Zoe, and for whoever else he might have targeted. On Wednesday afternoon, Vivian showed me a text from him. "Can we talk? I miss you. I'm ready to come home." "Should I respond?" she asked. "Yes," I said. "Tell him you miss him too, that you're sorry you doubted him. Say I was jealous and just trying to stir up trouble." Her jaw tightened as she typed the words, but her message was bait George couldn't resist. He replied within minutes, promising he'd be home Friday night and that they could start fresh. Thursday morning, Agent Max laid out the operation. "The apartment will be wired. Vivian, you'll wear a recording device. Agents will be nearby. All we need is for him to admit he knew the money was stolen and that he married you to get access to your inheritance." "What if he doesn't?" Vivian asked. "Then we proceed with the evidence we already have," Max said. "But a confession will strengthen the case and help us tie him to other victims." Friday came faster than I was ready for. I sat in my living room, a book open on my lap, though I hadn't read a single line. My phone was in my hand, waiting. At 7:43 p.m., Vivian's text arrived, "He's here." At 8:15, another, "Flowers and wine. Playing perfect husband." At 8:52, talking about a honeymoon. Asking about my savings account. And finally, at 9:31, got him to admit knowledge of offshore accounts. FBI moving in now. I set down my phone and poured myself a glass of wine. George Stewart's game was over. His long run of cons had just ended. But I had a feeling the best part was still coming. By Monday, the story hit the news. Local man arrested in multi-state financial fraud scheme, the Portland Press-Herald announced. They didn't name Vivian, calling her only the most recent victim. But George's mugshot filled half the page. The charm was gone. He looked like exactly what he was, a common criminal who finally ran out of smooth lines. Vivian came over for lunch that day, arms full of Chinese takeout, looking lighter than she had in months. "Agent Max called this morning," she said while unpacking cartons of lo mein and sweet and sour chicken. "George has been formally charged with conspiracy, money laundering, and fraud across multiple states. Bail's been set at $500,000. I nearly choked on my tea. $500,000? She nodded. They consider him a flight risk. With his offshore accounts and history of running when he's caught, he's not going anywhere. His parents can't afford the bail, and his accounts are frozen while the investigation continues, Vivian told me. We ate in silence for a few minutes, the clink of chopsticks and the smell of lo mein filling the space. Then she set down her fork and looked at me. Mom, I need to ask you something, and I want the truth. I put my chopsticks aside. What is it, sweetheart? How long did you know? About George. About his pattern, about what he was after. I thought about softening it, but Vivian deserved honesty now, more than ever. I suspected from the very beginning, I admitted. But I didn't have proof until about 3 months ago. That's when I hired the private investigator. 3 months ago, she whispered. She thought for a moment, then nodded. Right around the time I told you about the whole boundaries conversation. Yes, I said. And you didn't warn me directly because you knew I wouldn't believe you. I met her eyes. Would you have? She lowered her head. No. I would have thought you were jealous, or trying to interfere. He had me so convinced that you were the problem. She toyed with her noodles for a moment, then asked, how did you even know to look into his grandfather's background? I recognized the name Stewart from your father's old papers. Once I realized the connection, I knew there had to be more. Vivian sat quietly for a long time. When she finally spoke, her voice was heavy with regret. I was so cruel to you, Mom. I shut you out. I said terrible things. I left you out of my wedding because he told me it was healthy. Vivian, I began. No, let me finish, she said. I chose a man I'd known for 2 years over the woman who sacrificed everything to raise me alone. I believed his version of family instead of trusting my own. And I'm ashamed. I reached across the table and took her hand. Sweetheart, you were manipulated by an expert predator. That's not your fault. But I should have seen through him, she insisted. I'm smart. I'm educated. I'm successful. How could I have been so blind? Because he targeted those very things, I told her. He saw a strong, independent woman and twisted your strength into weakness. That's what predators do. They don't go after people with nothing. They go after people who have something worth taking. Vivian squeezed my hand. How do I make this right with you? You already have, I said softly. You're here. You're safe. You're free. That's all I ever wanted. We finished our lunch, then spent the afternoon paging through old photo albums. Vivian laughed through her tears as she pointed at snapshots from our summers at the beach house, asking me to retell stories she'd half forgotten. Brick by brick, moment by moment, we were rebuilding what George had tried to tear down. That evening, as she was leaving, she paused at the door. Mom, there's going to be a civil trial. Agent Max says the families of George's other victims are filing a class action lawsuit. They want me to be part of it. Are you going to join them? I asked. She smiled, and for the first time in 2 years, I saw the same fierce, determined smile I remembered from her childhood. Oh, absolutely. I'm going to make sure George Stewart never hurts another woman again. That's my girl, I thought. Welcome back. 6 weeks later, the trial began. It was everything I could have hoped for. Patricia Winters had been right, Vivian was entitled to nearly $4 million in recovered assets, plus interest and damages. But more importantly, the prosecution built an airtight case that exposed George's entire operation. Tiffany Morris flew in from Seattle, calm and confident in a navy blue suit. Zoe Walsh came up from New York, nervous but brave, ready to speak the truth. Together with Vivian, they painted a portrait of a predator who had perfected his scheme over years. I sat in the gallery every single day, watching my daughter stand tall. She spoke about the manipulation, the isolation, the way George had convinced her to doubt herself and push away the people who loved her most. She spoke with clarity and strength, her voice steady, her facts sharp. Not once did she crumble. George's defense attorney tried to paint him as a misguided young man, someone who made mistakes but wasn't truly criminal. That illusion shattered when Agent Max presented evidence, George's careful research on each victim, even surveillance photos of Vivian weeks before their so-called accidental coffee shop meeting. But the most devastating blow came from a witness no one expected, Marcus Webb, the man George had been emailing about those offshore accounts. Arrested as an accomplice, Webb cut a deal and took the stand. Mr. Stewart contacted me in 2018, Webb testified, asking for help with accounts his grandfather had hidden. When I explained the legal problems, he told me he had a long-term plan to legitimize access to the funds. The prosecutor leaned in. What kind of plan? He said he was going to marry someone with a legal claim. He showed me old articles about Todd Thompson's financial losses, explained that Thompson's heir would inherit rights to the stolen money. He said once he had access through marriage, he could claim the funds as community property. I saw Vivian pale as the words sank in. Did Mr. Stewart ever discuss specific targets? The prosecutor asked. Yes, Webb said. He had 3 candidates, based on their families' financial situations. He showed me their social media profiles, explained why each one was vulnerable. Was one of them Vivian Thompson? Yes, Webb replied. He called her the perfect target, successful but emotionally isolated after her father's abandonment, deeply attached to her mother who owned valuable property, and naive about relationships because of limited dating experience. From my seat, I watched my daughter hear herself described not as a wife, not as a partner, but as a mark. The pain in Vivian's eyes that day was hard to watch. But under it, I caught a flicker of something stronger, rage. Pure, focused rage at the man who had dissected her vulnerabilities like a predator stalking prey. George's attorney kept objecting, desperate to patch holes in a sinking ship, but the damage was done. The jury now understood, George hadn't just stumbled into stolen money. He had orchestrated a years-long con to manipulate Vivian into marriage, a legal doorway to her family's assets. When Marcus Webb stepped down from the stand, George looked smaller, diminished. The polished suit, the well-groomed hair, none of it mattered anymore. He was hunched in his chair, just a common crook stripped of the charm he'd worn like a costume. The jury deliberated less than 3 hours. When they returned, the words hit the courtroom like a gavel to the heart, guilty on all counts. Conspiracy. Money laundering. Fraud. And, thanks to Webb's testimony, a new charge, criminal marriage fraud with intent to commit grand larceny. The judge handed down the sentence, 12 years in federal prison, plus full restitution to every victim, over $8 million, including damages and interest. Since George had already bled through most of the stolen funds, it meant he would leave prison as broke as the women he drained. Vivian delivered her victim impact statement at sentencing. Her voice was steady, but her words cut deeper than any prosecutor's. George Stewart didn't just steal money from me, she said, staring straight at him as he sat shackled at the defense table. He stole 2 years of my life. He stole my relationship with my mother. He stole my ability to trust my own judgment, and my faith in love itself. He convinced me the people who cared about me most were the enemy, all while plotting to strip me of everything I had. She paused, gathering herself, then her voice sharpened like steel. But here's what George never understood about the women he targeted. We're not weak. We're not victims waiting to happen. We are strong, intelligent women who were temporarily deceived by a skilled liar. And when the truth came out, we didn't crumble. We stood together and fought back. George never lifted his eyes, but I saw his shoulders tremble when she finished. I hope you spend every day of your sentence thinking about the lives you destroyed, and the women who proved stronger than you ever imagined. When the sentencing was done, we gathered outside the courthouse, Vivian, Tiffany, Zoe, Agent Max, and me. Cameras flashed. Reporters called out. But we turned them down. This wasn't about headlines or revenge. It was about justice. Tiffany hugged Vivian. Thank you for being brave enough to wear that wire. Without it, he might still be walking free. Zoe took my hand and whispered, "Thank you for not giving up on her. If you hadn't dug into his past, he'd still be out there finding new victims." Agent Max handed us each her card. "You've helped shut down a predator who might have ruined dozens more lives. The FBI appreciates your cooperation, but more than that, you should be proud of your courage." As the crowd thinned, Vivian and I walked together in silence toward our cars. Finally, she stopped and turned to me. "Mom, can I ask you something?" "Anything, sweetheart." She smiled, that beautiful, confident smile I hadn't seen in years. "Would you help me plan a real wedding someday? When I find someone who actually deserves me. Someone who loves you, too. Because if he doesn't value my mother, then he doesn't deserve me." Tears stung my eyes. "I'd be honored. And, Mom," she added softly, "the beach house. I know George made me say all those awful things about it not being good enough. But the truth is, I've always dreamed of getting married there. Barefoot in the sand. Fairy lights between the dunes. Just like I planned when I was a little girl." "It would be perfect," I whispered, pulling her into my arms. As we drove away from the courthouse, I thought about the woman I had raised. She'd been deceived, manipulated, pushed to the edge, but she had found her way back to herself, and back to me. George Stewart had made one fatal mistake. He believed isolating Vivian would make her weak. But instead, it only fueled her strength, and when she came back to me, our fury together was more devastating than he could have imagined. The predator had become the prey. And justice had been delivered by the very women he thought he could destroy. Some wedding gifts really do keep giving, and once the gift of truth is opened, it can never be taken back. Thank you for listening. Don't forget to subscribe and share your own story in the comments. Because your voice matters. In the months that followed George Stewart's conviction, life slowly began to heal. The beach house, once a symbol of what he tried to take, became our sanctuary again. Vivian and I spent that summer there, walking barefoot along the shoreline, stringing fairy lights between the dunes, and laughing over memories that had nearly been stolen from us. Vivian rebuilt her career with more fire than ever before. She spoke at women's conferences about financial independence and emotional resilience, turning her pain into a message of strength. Tiffany and Zoe stayed in touch, bonded forever by the scars of the same predator. Together, the three of them founded a small nonprofit to support women targeted by financial abuse, making sure George's story would never repeat itself in silence. As for me, I found peace in knowing I hadn't just protected my daughter, I had helped her find her voice. The bond between us was stronger than it had ever been. We no longer talked every day out of habit, but out of choice, with an honesty that neither of us would ever take for granted again. George sits behind bars, counting the years, but what he left behind is more powerful than any of the lies he spun. He thought he was clever enough to sever family ties and smart enough to turn love into a ledger. What he never understood is that truth has a way of clawing its way to the surface, and love, real love, doesn't fracture so easily. Vivian often says the greatest wedding gift I gave her wasn't exposing George. It was reminding her who she was, strong, brilliant, and unbreakable. And when that day comes, when she stands barefoot in the sand under streams of light at the beach house, surrounded by people who truly matter, I'll be there, not just as her mother, but as her fiercest ally, her witness, and her home. Because in the end, predators come and go. But family, the kind built on truth, trust, and love, endures. Always. 4 months passed after George was sentenced, and the air in our lives felt lighter with each week that slipped by. Vivian had rebuilt her strength brick by brick, her confidence stitched back together with every day she woke up free of his shadow. And then, one chilly afternoon in late January, she called me. Her voice had that quiet spark I hadn't heard in years. "Mom," she said, "I met someone." At first, my heart clenched. After everything she'd endured, I worried she was rushing, that the wounds hadn't fully healed. But then she began to tell me about him, Daniel. A widowed architect in his 40s, a man who had lost much himself but carried it with dignity instead of bitterness. He wasn't flashy, he didn't arrive in expensive suits or shower her with grand gestures. He showed up with honesty, with kindness, and with the ability to listen. For weeks, I listened as she spoke about their walks by the harbor, the evenings they spent cooking together, the way he asked about her work and genuinely cared about the answers. Most of all, I noticed how calm her voice sounded. There was no desperate edge, no nervous overcompensating. Vivian was at peace. On Valentine's Day, Daniel invited her to a quiet dinner at a small seaside restaurant. He gave her a single red rose, not a dozen, and a handwritten letter that began, "I never believed in second chances until I met you." When dessert arrived, he slipped a velvet box across the table. "Vivian," he said, his voice steady, "will you marry me?" And this time, there were no secrets, no manipulation, no hidden agenda. Just love. When she called me that night, sobbing happy tears, I felt something deep inside me heal. After all the darkness, my daughter had found light again. The weeks that followed became a whirlwind of planning, but this time, it was different. Vivian didn't shut me out. She pulled me in, closer than ever before. Together, we scribbled ideas on notepads late into the night, spread fabric swatches across my dining table, and laughed until our sides ached while trying on veils and flower crowns. "Not at a country club," Vivian declared one evening, grinning as she flipped through old photo albums. "Not in a banquet hall. I want it here, at the beach house. Barefoot in the sand. Just like I dreamed when I was little." And so it was decided. We invited only those who truly mattered, close friends, Tiffany and Zoe who had become like sisters to Vivian, a handful of colleagues who had supported her through the storm, and Daniel's small but warm-hearted family. 40 people at most. But what we lacked in numbers, we made up for in beauty. On the morning of the wedding, the ocean stretched out calm and endless, reflecting the pastel pink of the rising sun. Vivian and I draped fairy lights between the dunes and laid out seashells along the aisle. White chairs faced the water, and an arch of driftwood wrapped in roses and hydrangeas stood like a crown at the edge of the tide. I watched Vivian slip into her dress, simple, flowing, with lace at the shoulders, and for a moment I saw not just the bride she had become, but the little girl who used to run barefoot across this very sand, dreaming of fairy tale weddings. As guests arrived, laughter and music mingled with the crash of waves. Tiffany hugged me tight. "She looks radiant. This is the ending she deserved all along." And when Daniel appeared at the arch, waiting, his face breaking into a smile as Vivian walked toward him, I felt my heart swell with something I hadn't felt in years, unshakable peace. The ceremony was short, but every word carried weight. "I promise to protect your heart, not possess it," Daniel vowed, his voice rough with emotion. "I promise to honor the family that raised you, to love your mother as part of you, because without her, I wouldn't have the gift of you today." Tears slipped down my cheeks as Vivian answered, "And I promise to trust, to let love in, and to never forget what it means to stand together, not in shadows, but in light." When they kissed, the crowd erupted in applause, and the fairy lights twinkled as if the universe itself was blessing them. The reception was nothing short of magical. Long tables stretched across the sand, draped in white cloth, with lanterns swaying in the ocean breeze. We ate lobster rolls, fresh oysters, and slices of vanilla cake topped with sugared roses. Guests danced barefoot in the sand while a small band played soft jazz under the stars. At one point, Vivian pulled me onto the dance floor. "Mom," she whispered, her smile brighter than the moonlight, "thank you for saving me. Thank you for believing in me when I didn't even believe in myself." I held her close, swaying to the music. "Sweetheart, you saved yourself. I just helped you see the truth." Later, as I watched her dance with Daniel, their laughter echoing across the shore, I realized the circle had closed. The girl who had once been lost in the grip of a predator had risen stronger, wiser, and braver than ever. And the love she found now wasn't built on lies or illusions, it was real, enduring, and worthy of her. That night, as I lay in bed listening to the ocean outside the beach house window, I thought about the journey we had walked together. The lies, the betrayal, the pain, they had been chapters, not the whole story. This was the story's heart. And as the waves rolled on, steady and eternal, I knew this time my daughter's forever was exactly what she deserved.